Hello and welcome, everyone. Very excited to have each and every one of you here with us today. We are talking about coaching programs, the focus being in an organization offering coaching and what that looks like, how to set it up. During the conversation, please feel free to put messages in the chat box, in the question panel, wherever you want. I will monitor all of those as we go. Let's get you the information you want. The plan for our conversation today will explore what a coaching program entails, review 3 keys for effective coaching programs in organizations. Specifically, we'll talk program design and processes, onboarding for coaches and clients, and then the matching process for both internal and external coaches with the clients. We've got some extra tips for you at the end. We'll share a few resources and, of course, have time for questions and answers. In terms of the coaching program, what exactly is involved in setting this up? We start with what is the purpose of a coaching program, the reason for having it, the objectives, what you want to accomplish with that. In many organizations, the primary focus is on developing people, bringing up high potentials, future leaders, or as leaders grow and advance or transition into different roles, supporting that. It is key that the organization be intentional in terms of what they want with the coaching program, because that then guides so many of the steps they take and the processes they put in place. Once you know the purpose and the objectives, where it's going to be managed or housed in the organization is important. In some organizations, it gets housed in the human resource department. If an organization has an organizational development department, it may be there. Oftentimes there's a training department. Sometimes coaching is housed there. It may even be housed at a higher level in administration. It is about determining who is going to oversee this program and how are they going to do that. Absolutely key, because the success of it involves having someone who really wants a successful coaching program. In terms of processes, we'll dig into those more, how you're doing the different pieces, onboarding, etc. And then who has access to the program? In some organizations, coaching is reserved for the higher levels. In other organizations, they're opening up access to more and more levels of people on the team. The more people that have access to the coaching, the better. It's such a great resource, such a great tool. One of the things to consider, of course, is the cost of that. That is the reason it tends to be most commonly available at the higher levels. Well, the good news is when you have a coaching program, you can have internal coaches that work with the entry-level people, and then as they move up, bring in external coaches. Who's going to have access to the coaches is a big question. As far as the coaches themselves, you want to be sure you're setting that up properly with training and onboarding. The mistakes people make is, okay, we're going to pick coaches the way we pick a mentor, for example. Mentors are people with a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom. They pass that on, they give advice, they help people with connections, etc. It is a very different role than coaching. And if we're putting coaches in that don't have coach training, we're not going to have the efficacy in the program that you will have when the coach has been properly trained. It is a best practice to have external training for your internal coaches. And the reason for that is quite simple. Many organizations will develop the training internally. And what that means is that there are people who are really great at training, aren't coaches, and they're developing training for coaches without really being aware of what is involved, what it entails. it's got to be coaches involved in what the training looks like. So having the training for them, and a key piece to that is looking at whether or not the training is speaking to the competencies of a coach, the ethics of a coach. There's so much involved. Onboarding coaches, that can be a tough one. So the internal coaches who has the ability to learn the skill set and the capacity to be available to do coaching. Commonly in organizations, they'll say, okay, we'll commit to getting the training for you, and we want you to commit to X number of clients over X period of time in exchange for that. And ensuring that person has time in their work schedule for actually doing the coaching, and that they have the interest in doing the coaching. Similarly, when you think about clients, who gets to be the client? If people are voluntold, okay, you're going to have a coach. Sometimes that sets it up on a negative tone. They feel like, oh, I'm being voluntold to have a coach. There must be something wrong. And an effective coach knows how to work with that person, have the conversation so they get having a coach is truly a benefit. It isn't a negative, it's a good thing. It just means they have to overcome the negative of that. Alternatively, when coaching is an option, an opportunity, a benefit, and promoted that way, it sets that up in a whole different light. That's what you want to do in an organization. When we work with companies, one of the things we've done is create an application for coaching, and it can be filled out by the individual who wants a coach, or there's also an application that can be filled out by their manager. We call that person the sponsor. The key to it is how it's approached and how it's put out there. And the application we use sets that up appropriately. When somebody is going to be a client, the onboarding process for them, letting them know, hey, this is what it is, this is how it works, is huge. You want the client involved in choosing who the coach is. If people are simply assigned a coach, it is harder for it to be effective. It's possible, it just takes more. When people are involved in choosing who their coach is, they have more ownership, they're more invested in that process, and it's far more effective. Our favorite way of approaching that is to give each individual that's going to have a coach, the client, 3 possible coaches, and they can review coach bios, they can talk to the coaches if they want to, and then they choose who their coach is. That way, again, the investment, you're setting up that coaching engagement in a far more effective process. Another part of that engagement is determining how many sessions are going to be involved and over what period of time. Please note, coaching is a process, and it does take time to create the meaningful change that's going to stick. It is ideal to have 6 months, 12 sessions to work with that person. On a minimal level, at least 6. And of course, as noted, more is better. 12 is a great starting point. Commonly at that point, there's a determination to make. Is it beneficial to continue where there's value and it's making a difference? Or is this engagement complete because the client achieved what they wanted to achieve, what was possible to achieve through the coaching? And you determine whether or not the coaching relationship continues after that. To give you the research on it, according to ICF, the International Coaching Federation, the average coaching relationship will last a year, 12 months. At the same time, yes, we know sometimes it's a matter of time and cost and that kind of thing. So it's balancing those elements of it. You also want to think about how you measure the efficacy of the program. In many organizations, they start with establishing the baseline. How do they do that? Sometimes there are metrics that are already available, and those metrics may include things like productivity, employee engagement, etc. Other times there'll be an assessment that's given. And then after the coaching engagement, repeating the assessment as a way of measuring the outcome. There are quantitative measures and there are qualitative measures. To give you an example, Triad Performance Technologies did a study and they looked at coaching of salespeople in telecommunication. And they measured based on the sales numbers, a pure dollar amount, 1,000% ROI. Phenomenal, because it was a very clear-cut measurement. In many organizations, a little bit tougher. How do you establish the dollar value of engagement or productivity? Talent retention is one way that's looked at, because when an organization is retaining talent, it's saving them money. They can look at what it would cost to replace somebody and compare that to the cost of the program as a way of measuring, hey, did we get our investment back? Quite a few things. Look at both quantitative and qualitative for that. And then, of course, you want to be aware of the ongoing efficacy of the program. It is fairly common in organizations that whoever is managing the coaching program is checking in with the clients. Hey, how's this working for you? How's it going? What are you getting out of it? And they're checking with the client, asking the client to give them feedback on the value of the coaching. Sometimes that's written, sometimes it's verbal. It's a little bit tougher in terms of the coach, because of course the coach is going to be excited about what the work and what's happening. So the baseline measurement, looking at metrics that are available on an ongoing basis, and then of course feedback from the people who have a coach. Another part of the program is the design, how it's going to be created. In many organizations, we'll go in and help them set up, for example, a program manual. And it'll talk about, hey, this is what it is. This is the purpose of this program. These are the objectives of this program. And then it defines the processes. Here's how we're going to identify coaches and onboard them. Here's how we're going to identify clients and onboard them. Processes also includes some of the different agreements that happen, some of the different assessment evaluation forms that get used. And so it's laid out for the entire program. The onboarding of coaches and clients, and you're going to have both internal and external coaches. So we'll talk about what it looks like to onboard both, and then the matching process. So digging deeper in this conversation, when you set up the program, it is essential to have buy-in at the top levels of the organization, because that buy-in does trickle down, it spreads out. If the top levels of leadership are not buying into the program, it's really hard to keep it there for the long term and be successful with it. I've seen it done. I've seen people in lower levels in an organization who know the value of the coaching, and they have programs at that lower level. And over time, leadership sees the impact, sees the difference it makes, and then eventually they buy into it. It's a tougher approach. Obviously, getting the buy-in on the front end makes it easier, both because of the culture of the organization as a whole, accepting it, being engaged and invested in it, and also because of the financial support that means. How do you get that leadership buy-in? Well, measure the ROI of coaching. So there are research studies you can find. You'll see the average return on investment for coaching is 600%. Look at studies, Manchester, Metrics Global, or any number of studies, and they'll show you the value of the coaching. There was one done at Exxon, now part of British Petroleum. There was studies done at Xerox. Look at organizations that are similar and see what information you can find on their programs. Because when you can share with leaders the return on investment for coaching, you can share, hey, these other organizations similar to us have these coaching programs, and this is what they're saying they're getting out of it. That adds tremendous credibility in terms of them buying into it and supporting it. The oversight itself, who's managing it? We talked about housing it in different departments. Key to all of this is the individual. It is ideal if the person managing the coaching program is themselves trained in coaching, because when they themselves get what the coaching is, they're going to be much smarter in terms of providing coaches to the clients. They're going to understand how it works, how to evaluate the efficacy of the program, etc. Whether or not they're one of the people doing the coaching, if they have training, it makes a big difference. Yes, if they can be one of the coaches, and if they can be one of the clients, that's even better. That's amazing in a case like that. The knowledge base they have is going to be huge. Let's see. So there's a question came in, measuring ROI for coaching in admin and healthcare. And is it different across industries in your experience? So what I have seen, all of the research I have seen, the ROI is fairly consistent. I do happen to know a lot of healthcare organizations are using coaching and doing coaching programs. For example, I have trained a number of coaches from one where their focus is really working with physicians. And part of that is how the physicians are with patients, as well as supporting the physicians in their own career advancement. And I'm guessing it's a matter of reaching out to some of the other healthcare organizations and saying, hey, what are you doing? What can you share with me in terms of impact or results? Take advantage of your network, your opportunity to connect with people in similar roles in those organizations, and ask them. You will find, yes, there are places you can go and get the research. You can look online. And I think it's really helpful just to talk to people that are doing it. So hopefully that was helpful in terms of answering that question. Let's see. As far as identifying and onboarding people, having your process for how you determine who the coaches are going to be, who the clients are going to be, and your process for onboarding. We talk about ensuring the internal coaches are trained. I'm going to say the same is true of external coaches. You want to make sure they're ICF members, credential holders, because that tells you a lot about their efficacy as a coach. You also want to think about a process for onboarding external coaches to your organization. So there's an awareness and a familiarity with what your culture is. That helps them be effective when they're coaching your employees. Very commonly, for example, when we work with an organization, we'll set up an orientation for the coaches so they can get to know your company. The engagement itself, having a process for that. How are you determining how many sessions are going to happen, when they're happening, where they're happening, etc. In today's world, it's great to know that coaching is actually fairly commonly done on the phone or online. So location doesn't matter. If you have people in the office, if you have remote people, people scattered around the globe, etc., it still works. And it's one of the great things in terms of working with a team that is remote. Commitment to the process is really big. You want the leadership committed to it. You want the people running it committed to it. You will find your coaches committed to it, because when they're trained and they're doing it, they get the value of it. And then as people have a coach and gain the value, the benefit from it, that commitment will occur as well. So it's starting at the top and spreading down in terms of that commitment. Okay, research, get your ROI. set that up ahead of time, talk to the other organizations in your industry, discuss it with your leaders and get their commitment to your organization, and then communicate that out. Have them communicate it out ideally. So it just huge difference start to finish in terms of that process. For the oversight, we talked about having somebody who is themselves a coach. Very, very valuable in terms of doing that. Help them out with forms. So for example, we'll go in, if you have external coaches, you commonly have what we call a master service agreement with the organization. It's more the legalese because it's with the organization. And then there's a regular agreement that is between the coach and the client. So those forms being available are helpful. Your applications to be a coach, to be a client are helpful tools. Your information to onboard the coaches and bring that in is a helpful tool. The forms for what people are getting out of the coaching, giving feedback, assessing, etc., that can be very essential. Let's see. Oh, a really, really good point. In terms of who manages the program, it is essential that they have credibility in the organization, because if they don't, it's really tough. The coaching program gets associated with somebody who is not respected, not liked, and that makes it really tough to get there. So that's a really good comment. Thank you for calling that out. And you're right on with that. It is important that the person who manages the program is respected and liked inside the organization. In addition to forms, the processes. So very often there's even a flow chart. Okay, here's what's going to happen. We identify coaches or possible coaches. Internal coaches, it's do they have training or how are we providing that training? External coaches, ensuring they are trained and credentialed. That's where asking about ICF membership and a credential comes in. Then in terms of those coaches, you want to have a process for making them available to the clients. One of the things we like to do is have a coach bio, and we'll standardize them so that coaches are all providing information in the same format, makes it easier for the client. Then for the client, we have their application to be a client. Whether they fill it out or their sponsor, the manager fills it out. Then the client is given 3 bios of coaches. They can choose who they want. And then once they choose that person, we've already established how many sessions that individual is going to get over what time period, and they can begin. Now, it's interesting in a lot of organizations in terms of where the coaching happens or how it happens. There's tremendous value excuse me, in the coaching being done over the phone or on a computer. And the reason for that, we all think about face-to-face and we love the face-to-face and we love that connection. The challenge to that is that when we are face-to-face, the client is watching the coach and how the coach is reacting to what they say. And when they're watching the coach and the coach's reaction, it starts changing how they're thinking and what they're focusing on and what they're doing. It isn't about the coach's impression in terms of what they decide to do. It's their own thinking. And by setting up the coaching relationship where you can be, for example, in Zoom and go off camera, or you can be on the phone, there's value to that. Alternatively, yeah, there's value to doing the face-to-face too, because of that connection and being with somebody else in that shared space. Talk about the pros and the cons, and ideally have sessions both ways, and then let the client choose what's going to work for them. It's fascinating that very commonly the clients who have done several sessions where they're on the phone or off camera like to continue that way. Yes, the live face-to-face can be helpful, and there's value in the other. So making that choice an option for people is really important. In terms of recruiting coaches, so internally, it's identifying. I'm going to give a nod to the comment from earlier about someone who is credible. The same is going to be true of your internal coaches. Having a coach that is respected and liked is going to be important when they're internal. So identifying those people. It's also identifying people that are going to have the skill set for it. It's identifying people that have the capacity in their schedule to do it. That can be a challenge in an organization. Sometimes people self-nominate to be a coach. Sometimes their colleagues or supervisors nominate them. There's a number of ways to do it. As far as setting that up, the important piece to it is letting people know, hey, this is what it is. Here's the benefit of being a coach. Here's what you get when you become a coach. It's a big deal. And promoting that. Then the application process for it. Now, when you're talking about recruiting external coaches, there are a number of coaching firms. Of course, the one I'm going to promote is the one I'm involved with. It's called Coach 123, and we provide coaches to organizations. There are a number of other firms out there. There are also a lot of coaches that put themselves out there individually. There's pros and cons with that. As an organization, if you're working with a number of coaches individually, it can become a bit of an administrative nightmare, having so many different individuals that you're coordinating with. So the value of the firm becomes they're doing the work for you, making it easy for you. As far as having that coach. The other piece to that is if one coach doesn't work out, the firm is going to give you a different one. So you've got that kind of access. And then, of course, you want a coaching firm that's going to make sure quality control. It's more than just, oh, we have a bunch of coaches. It's who are these coaches? What's their experience? What's their background, etc. So you have options for that. In terms of the training coaches, if you are going to do an internal program, it'll be really, really smart to work with an organization to start that and provide it. So as an example, at the Center for Coaching Certification, we will go into organizations, we'll do an initial training, and then we will train somebody in the organization to teach the program and license it to the organization so they can train internal coaches. We also have a lot of organizations that just every time they bring in a new coach, they send them to one of our public classes and have the training handled that way. So you've got choices with that. You do want to ensure that the training is accredited by the International Coaching Federation. That'll speak to the content and the quality of the training that somebody receives. As far as clients, when people can apply themselves and they have to ask their obviously manager, supervisor for permission to have a coach because of the cost involved in that. Other times it's the manager or the supervisor saying, hey, I've got somebody on my team, we're bringing them up as a leader, or we want to address something to help them be more effective, whatever it is, that process. And so they submit that application to the program management and get selected to actually have a coach for that engagement with the clients. I have seen clients that just read coach bios and choose their coach that way. I have seen where they actually call and interview each of the coaches, which is ideal. They get a chance to talk to them, to ask a few questions. And it does often change who they select because how somebody is on paper may be different than how they are in person. We recommend that the clients call the coach, ask a few questions, get to know them, etc., before they select which coach they want. The sessions That's being determined in terms of how many by the organization, the sponsor, etc. Where they occur and when they occur is coordinated between the coach and the client, and you want to give them the freedom to do that. Now, a note for everyone: there are organizations that have platforms for online meetings, and they'll sometimes say, okay, we want our, the coaching sessions to use that platform. There's a risk with that, because when the platform is owned by the organization, it may give somebody access to those coaching sessions. So think about what the implication is of that. It can really break down the value of the coaching. My recommendation is that the platform be provided by the coach, their own platform, if it's an external coach. If it's an internal coach, I'm still going to say you can sign up for a free Zoom account and meet on Zoom. And if it's the coach's account, then you're protecting to another degree the confidentiality of the session. As far as scheduling, again, coordinated between the coach and the client, give them the freedom to do that. The length. So a common coaching session is 60 minutes. You also have sessions that are 50 minutes. So the coach has, time 5 minutes before or after or whatever to wrap up any details they want to wrap up, the scheduling, etc. I have seen organizations that do 30-minute sessions. I've also had engagements where instead of meeting once a week for an hour, it's once every other week or even once a month for several hours. Part of that is based on the client, what's effective for them. It is also important to be aware of, okay, how effective is the coaching based on the length of the session itself. When somebody is new to coaching and just getting started, longer sessions, more the 60-minute time period can be helpful. And when they've worked with a coach for a while, it gets easier to have a shorter session, and that's okay. And they can split up that time. It becomes an option. How often they meet, I have seen where it's okay, we're just going to meet every other week. That's what it is. I have also seen where the client is scheduling when they're ready for the next session and they have that kind of flexibility. It can vary. Commonly, when you start, there's a couple of sessions to really get things going and rolling. Doing those quickly can be really helpful so that the client starts getting into the cadence of it and then spreading them out further. So for example, the first couple sessions within a week or a week apart to get going, and then move to an every other week or once a month, depending on what works for the client. The processes for the coaching itself are completely all over the board. Very helpful to have trained coaches, because then they are learning different processes and are aware of options. So we mentioned the possibility of having an assessment. So some organizations will have the client do an assessment, then they move into the coaching, because the assessment identifies what their strengths are, what their opportunities for development are, things that they may want to focus on during their coaching. That can be one process. Another process, kind of the standard, if you will, in a coaching session is the coach asking the client what they want to focus on, what their agenda for the conversation is, and going through with a series of questions, helping the client explore and figure out what they want to do. Involved in that, you may have role plays where they're role playing different situations together between the coach and the client. You may have them designing something. There's a tool called Canva, for example, a number of different creativity tools online, and those can be awesome in terms of having a coaching session where they get in and they're whiteboarding together or designing something as a way of working through whatever the client wants to work through. Another process, for example, may be when you have a leader the coach will work with them to list, okay, here's all the people on my team. And then they start talking about the personalities of each person on the team, the skill sets of each person, and how easy it is to delegate to them. And they literally create this matrix for the leader to use in terms of how they're managing different people. Knowing that the door is open in terms of what process serves the client is fun. You can get creative. You can do it the way it works for them. Let's see, a couple more things came in the question box. Best cadence for boosting transformation. And you said you found every 2 weeks at most. I'm going to say it's so individualized. I can give you a standard answer. And the reality is it does vary based on the client. The process that I use in terms of starting with a new client, we do an opening session, which is a big picture exploration. Then we have a process that truly supports the client being focused and engaged and confident and proactive and positive. Those 2 sessions, I'll do fairly quickly with clients. And then by the 3rd session, okay, now we've really done a lot to set them up. Now we're moving into what they want to focus on and work on. So getting to that 3rd session within a week or 2 can be really helpful. After that, every 2 weeks is effective. If they're 30-minute sessions, it's fairly common for those to be on a weekly basis. I do have high-level executives that they just can't meet that often. At the same time, when we do have a conversation, they really like the idea of having time for it. And that's where I mentioned the possibility of once a month for several hours as an option. And I've done that with a number of executives and it works really well for them. It's tailoring it to the client. The routine of every other week is fairly common. It varies based on what serves the client. The other comment in the question box, those of you who are graduates of the Center for Coaching Certification have a dashboard on called Assessments 24/7. And you have quite a few assessments available on that dashboard that you can give. What I love about the dashboard is in addition to those assessments that are there, you have resource guides, facilitator guides, all kinds of information that support you effectively using those. So yeah, nice comment. Glad you like those assessments. Definitely something worth taking advantage of. Okay, as far as support, when you have a coaching program, how are you supporting people? How are you supporting the coaches that are doing the coaching? How are you ensuring they have access to information, to resources, et cetera? And similarly, the clients. If a client is working on skill development and they identify something, what is available to them as far as being able to take a class or do some additional learning or skill development? Very, very important. Think and plan ahead in terms of what you want to have available. And the other thing I'm going to say is be flexible, because when you're flexible, your coaches and your clients know they can come to the program management and say, hey, is it possible to get this kind of support or help? And you look at, okay, how can we make that happen? Very, very helpful for people that support be available. When you're talking external coaches, the nice thing about that is you set up that engagement and coaching firms do support the coaches. For example, at Coach 123, we've got the availability of connection executives, of our team lead, myself, any one of our coaches, if they want to have a conversation and say, okay, what can I do with this? How do I approach this, et cetera? So we have that kind of support available. The agreement part we talked about in forms, when you have an agreement between the coach and the client, it's really supporting the effectiveness of the engagement, because they're talking about what the roles are, what the coach's responsibilities are, what the client's responsibilities are, and what it's going to look like. It does help set that up effectively. With external coaches, it's going to be the same thing. You have the master service agreement with the organization, and then the agreement with the client in terms of what that engagement is and how it works. All right. So We've explored how coaches are recruited, identifying people internally, what that looks like, and the access to people externally for those coaches. Your best practice is the internal coaches for entry to mid-level, and that is because of cost, because it does work at that rate. When you have internal coaches that are respected and trained, they can be really effective with the entry to mid-level people on the team. Then, as also a best practice, you want to bring in external coaches for your higher levels of leadership and management. And it makes sense. Think about it this way. It'd be pretty tough for a leader to have somebody who is at a different level, for example, at a lower level in terms of the hierarchy, be their coach, because they can't really say certain things. Higher level leaders also have that concern around confidentiality. It's important to them to have an outside coach for the different perspective, etc. When you have the training, we talked about that as well. External training for internal coaches. When you're using a coaching firm, find out how that coaching firm is ensuring the coaches have the appropriate level of training and skill for doing the work. And then, of course, let the firm manage that. Do make sure they have a process for that. And it's okay to ask how coaches are supported. We talked about offering things internally. It's okay to ask a firm, how do you support the coaches that are on the team and being provided through the agreement that you have with them? For the clients, some clients are self-identifying, some are being put forward by a leader. How are they making that decision in terms of being the client? As far as getting them started, keep in mind that when you have clients inside of an organization, they're not paying for the coaching. The organization is paying for the coaching. So you do want them invested in the coaching. You want them to have some skin in the game. And that's where that application process comes in. That's where having them interview different coaches and select a coach comes in. All of that supports that client being invested in it. Because if you're going to invest in them with the coach, you want them invested in what they get out of the coaching. And then, of course, supporting that, giving them a chance to give feedback on the coaching. If for some reason it's not working with that coach, or maybe they worked with that coach, they got everything accomplished they were able to accomplish with that coach, and now it's time for a different coach. That's okay too, making that an option for them. And then, of course, where they identify skills they want to develop, supporting them in doing that. What's it going to take for them to get there? And if it's a class or something like that, giving them access to that. Your internal coaches for your entry-level people, you're up to mid-level management. You do want the coach to be at a higher level in management than the client. External coaches for the higher levels of management, and then definitely have the client involved in selecting which coach. So for example, at coach 1, 2, 3, what we'll do is ask, okay, when the organization says we're going to give you a client, we'll say, okay, what are the objectives for this client? And sometimes you've got to separate. The organization says, these are our objectives, and the client says, these are my objectives. They may or may not match. So there's some exploration there, and ensuring that whatever the focus is, everybody's happy with that. Keep in mind, some organizations really get coaching and they understand it's totally up to the client what they want to accomplish. Other organizations want to dictate what's being done. And then it's a conversation. It's making clear that ultimately the client gets to choose, and the coach can also ask the client, your organization wants you to work on this. What happens if you address it? What happens if you don't? And set it up. Be crystal clear on what that's going to look like. all of these pieces feed into how important it is that the coach and the client get to talk before they decide which coach it's going to be. In coaching, the number one indicator of success is the rapport between the coach and the client. So if you think about all these things we're sharing with you and talking about, where you want a coach that's been trained, you want to have the client involved in choosing their coach, you want to have that agreement in place, all of that is foundational to building rapport and having that kind of connection. The reason rapport is so key is because when you have that rapport, the client knows they can trust their coach. It means they really can open up and talk and explore and be vulnerable and change thinking and expand thinking. So it's essential that we support that from program design all the way through to delivery, support that rapport being developed. Role clarity is a big one. In organizations, when you have the internal coaches, this can be a tough piece. We have, for example, a lot of HR people that also coach. I think a really smart idea, and I know a number of HR people who coach that do it this way, is they make sure the setting is different for a coaching conversation than it is for an HR conversation. Whether they go meet in a conference room somewhere, or if they are meeting online, some different background or something like that, to really clarify and having that conversation with a client. Okay, this is an HR conversation. Here's what that means. This is a coaching conversation. Here's what that means. And schedule the time specifically. Very, very important. When you look at our competencies and our code of ethics, this is actually called out, being really clear on what the role is and then staying true to that role. The agreements that you put in place are huge. When we talk about agreements, we talk about them happening in phases. So the first phase is the initial conversation. What is coaching? How does it work? What does it look like, etc. The next phase is the formal agreement. In most countries, it is written. Yes, there are countries where that's an insult. So then we do a formal verbal agreement, and that's fine. Totally okay. Then every single coaching session, we have questions we ask at the start of the session. It is the coach's responsibility to ask the client, what do you want to focus on? How will you know this conversation was successful? What does a successful coaching conversation right now mean to you? And what's your agenda for the conversation? What do you want to talk through to get there? It is only when the coach is asking those 4 questions at the start of the conversation that they can really have a coaching session, and an effective one. Because when the coach gets the client determining their focus, their agenda, it sets up where the conversation is going to go, and it's easily managed. It's far more effective. Very, very important part of the process. Confidentiality is huge. We have our coaching code of ethics, and it talks about protecting the confidentiality of information. For organizations, there's a couple of things to be aware of. I'll give you a scenario. We had an internal coach working with a client. The client's manager came to the coach and said, I want to know what you're talking about. And the coach said, well, I can't share that with you. It's confidential. So the manager went to the IT department and said, get me the notes. And so the IT department went into the computer and got the notes, and confidentiality was violated. Here's the thing. It was the coach that violated confidentiality because they put information in a place that they didn't own or control. So it's essential that we're aware of how important that confidentiality is. If an organization is going to invest in a coaching program, the only way they're going to get the value out of it is when clients know they can actually have these conversations with their coach and the confidentiality is protected. So what does that mean? That means any notes that are taken during a coaching session are either handwritten and the coach or the client takes them home with them, or they're on a device that is owned by the coach or the client personally, and not on a company device. It also means if you're an external coach, this affects you as well. If you're emailing with the client, company-owned email addresses are owned by the company. So we don't want to send any private information on a company email address. We've got to protect confidentiality. Another piece to it, I mentioned the platform. Use the coach's platform, a private platform. And many organizations randomly record phone calls. So guess what? When you have a client in one of those organizations, you got to be talking about whether or not you're on a company telephone line. I do have a client, high level, that I work with, and we actually talk on their personal cell phone because the company phone line does get randomly recorded. So making sure you're aware of all the parameters of that confidentiality. Related to that, think about it this way. If a coach is storing any notes on the cloud, are they secure? No, they're not. So be aware of what you're doing to protect that client confidentiality. As a program manager, it means, okay, what are the safeguards in place? How's that being managed? Setting that up. As a client, you want to know your information is protected. It's a really important piece at all levels. The length of the engagement. If you do a minimum of 6 sessions, keep in mind for example, in the process we teach, the first couple sessions are eaten up by the full picture exploration, which is so vital to the client really being clear on what their top priorities are, what their influencing factors are. So that means you're going to have a couple sessions of onboarding and then 4 sessions that are coaching. And if the last one's the last session, some of that time's taken up. So ideally, the 12 sessions is really going to support the effectiveness of it. At the same time, that's time. Can we have an impact with a session or 2? Yes. Can we have more impact with 12 sessions? Absolutely. It's a matter of really looking at that and set yourselves up to measure the ROI of the program. That is going to be important on an ongoing basis. So getting the baseline before it starts, looking at whatever numbers you're using, whatever metrics you're using, looking at those periodically to evaluate, hey, what kind of impact is this program having? And where is that impact happening? Is it happening in talent retention, productivity, employee engagement? Are we seeing it because of the assessments that we're using, the feedback from the clients, et cetera? Be intentional about measuring that. It's all part of the process. Program manuals are really helpful, whether they're, some people like the hard copy, print it, that's great, or electronic. An intranet site can actually be helpful as well. So having a manual that guides everything that's going on. Yes, we can help with those. We've got that kind of information and material. You can also custom design it based on the organization and the objectives and create it that way. Coach trainings available. We provide public classes. We also provide classes inside organizations. So we commonly go into companies and train a group there so that they have their internal coaches. And then, of course, we can provide coaches. So training for the internal coaches, and we can provide external coaches as well. So what are these resources? We've got Coach 1, 2, 3. If you're looking for coaches, you want external coaches, great resource. If you're a graduate of the Center for Coaching Certification and you want to be available to coach, get in touch with me. We've got a process for that. We want to get you set up and signed up so that you're available to potentially coach some of these clients that we're providing coaches for. Of course, the Center for Coaching Certification, where there is a resource for you as well, doing the coach training and supporting you all the way through on that process. Outsourcing for coaching programs, whether it's your program manual, your original design and evaluation, whatever serves you, the coach training is available to you. And then, of course, the actual coaching for individuals, for groups, and for teams. I am now going to invite you, if there's additional questions, I'm happy to hang around and answer those additional questions. Whether you want to put them in the chat box, question panel, and then also if somebody wants to come on live, give me a note in the chat box. Let me know you want to come on live. Yes, I'm recording this. Yes, it's going on YouTube. So I know sometimes people hesitate with that. I'm more than happy to invite you in to be live. And then, all right, question panel. Okay, so I'm getting a thank you. It seems like we're complete. I will throw up for you. This is how you can reach me, get in touch with me. Let me know how we can be helpful and of service to you. Happy to be available and support you as either a coach looking for opportunities, as a client looking for a coach. If you want training, if you want coaching program support, whatever's going to serve you, happy to be available for that. So I'm all the comments I'm getting are saying thank you. I'm glad the information was helpful to you. Glad you got what you wanted out of it. So thank you for those comments. It's helpful to know that. Definitely appreciate each and every one of you. Appreciate you being here. Glad to have you here and glad to be of help and support for you and for your organization. So thank you